Hello, welcome to the Wildline Podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be a little bit of a different show. We're going to do the year in review for 2018. It's a little bit of a quiet weekend, so I felt like this would be a good time to do it, because if I don't do it now, Glass opens next weekend, so it's kind of just going to slip away. So I'm going to walk through the top 20 films on the domestic box office. Then I'll kind of analyze the higher level week in, week out. I'm not going to go too in depth in that, but we'll talk about the broad patterns. What was a good month, bad month, a good few weeks, bad few weeks, and just talk about sort of the macro viewpoint. And then I'll wrap it up with just sort of some thoughts about where I think the box office is going and what's sort of the future for movie theaters. Okay, so let's walk through the top 20 first, and then we'll look at the bigger picture, because it's actually better to take a look at the details first, I think, because that gives us some sort of context as to the bigger numbers as we get to those. So let's just walk through the top 20. Number 20 this year is almost basically a tie between Mary Poppins Returns, which obviously has made more money now because we're 13 days into the new year. It's still going pretty strong, not as strong as I would have hoped. But it's basically a tie between The Meg and Mary Poppins Returns. The Meg just slipped into the 20th spot, just ahead at $145 million, and basically $500K on top of that. So The Meg was a film. It opened up in August. There were some big trailers dropped for it earlier in the summer. I can't even remember when the first trailer dropped. I felt like it was like super early, like it may have even been like spring. There weren't exactly super high hopes for this one. I think going into that weekend, this would have been the weekend of August 10th. It's a slow period at the movies. That's when the summer season dies off, and it usually dies off very quickly. By the time you get to my birthday, which is the middle of August, the box office is just basically, it just kind of tailspins into a really tough month, which is September, which I think is usually the toughest month at the box office, for a lot of reasons. Summer vacations are coming to an end. Kids are going back to school. People in college are going back to school. They usually go back earlier than, let's say, grade school or high school. They usually go back in the middle of August, whereas younger kids go back, last week of August, early September. So it's a big transition time period. So Meg coming up on August 10th, it was just going to beat that sort of quieter period. And it comes out and does $45 million opening weekend. That was totally unexpected. Nobody thought this was going to happen. And I hate to say, it's like, I have to refrain from using the word unprecedented. And I could go on like a 20-minute rant on why I hate that word. But ever since Trump took office, like every single news story, and I watch like 100 news stories a day, they say it's unprecedented. Like the word loses its meaning if you use it so much. I'm going to use abnormal, or defies expectations. So The Meg wasn't supposed to do this good. It was supposed to probably open in the 20s, probably not have great legs, because it's a mixture of like a horror, kind of comedy, kind of adventure film. Legs on something like this weren't supposed to be all that good. But it ends up doing 145 total. What happened here is you had, it's kind of the anti-Snakes on a Plane, right? Because Snakes on a Plane, when you remember that movie came out, was one of the, I think it was 2006, I think, was one of the first movies that felt like it was being memed or like virally hyped into this frenzy where people are going to show up, it's going to make a ton of money, but it didn't happen. All the hype for Snakes on the Plane was before it came out, and it was almost about the concept or the fact that the film was being made at all. And then you had Samuel L. Jackson with the trailer and the line, something about snakes on a plane, blah, blah, blah. You know what I'm talking about. So The Meg didn't necessarily have all that ironic kind of 4chan-y trolley hype before it opened. I think people were just bored. They wanted something fun and kind of stupid to go see at the movie theater. And The Meg was perfect for that. It's not a good movie. No one ever going to say it's a good movie, but it's kind of a perfect August, end of the summer blockbuster release. I think people were kind of drained from Avengers Infinity War, and all of this sort of big summer movies, Ant-Man and the Wasp, Solo, Mission Impossible, all very big kind of serious films, and I think The Meg was a nice throwaway for the end of the summer. Now, so what was that multiplier? I gotta look this up really quick because I'm interested. A 3.2 multiplier for a film that's just not good, right? I mean, that you can't beat that for Warner Brothers. They had a really good year this year, besides Fantastic Beasts, which is number 19 on the top 20 domestic box office list. So Fantastic Beasts is still out, The Crimes of Grindelwald. It is open on November 16th, opened at 62, and now is sitting at 158. This one I've talked a lot about over the last couple of weeks, so I don't want to drone on about it too much. Sitting at a 2.55 multiplier right now. It's not going to do much more than what it's done already. It's just one of those movies that has a set fan base that went to go see it, and the general audiences are probably not going to go in droves anymore to see this. It really was kind of the first 3 weeks type run for this film. Not a great performance. It's one of the first one I felt got away with something. The first one, I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan, but I watch all the movies just to sort of, I guess for me, it's like in my head, it's market research or something. The first one felt like, wow, this had a lot of potential, but it just did not connect really at all to me. It felt very kind of demure and gray and kind of boring. There wasn't a lot of life in that movie. And I think people, the sequels always pay the crimes for the original, is what I usually say in terms of performance. Usually if a film gets away with something and it pops off and does really well, like for instance, if The Meg 2 came out in 2 years, I don't think it's going to do like half the amount of money the original one did, because the original one's not very good. And I think with like this one, I think this sequel, in terms of kind of poor financial performance, is kind of paying the price of the original not being all that good. People just didn't show up because, like, who wants to go to like pay like $15? You get popcorn, you get soda. You're talking like a $30-$40 trip. Gas, time. It's a long movie. If you got kids, that's a whole thing. The original did 234 back in November 16. This one's at 158. I can't see it going up too much more. So it's a significant underperformance from the original. And I feel like the Harry Potter universe has gone down this path, and they're going to have to go down a different path. Like, think about it, like, we're not going to talk about Bumblebee because it didn't hit the top 20, did it? I don't think it did. And so that where Bumblebee took the Transformers universe and said, hey, this isn't working anymore, what we're doing. Let's take a different path, different artistic direction, and go down. And I think it's going to work in the long term. Bumblebee may not make a lot of money. The head of Paramount said it's going to make money. I don't think, whatever. It's kind of sounds like PR bullshit to me. But it helped take that cinematic universe, or entire brand is where it takes that brand in a different direction. The Harry Potter brand, it's kind of now stuck at this dead end because this performance of Fantastic Beasts 2 is just not good enough. And I don't think it's going to be very profitable, if at all. It's definitely more on the underperformance flop side of things, but it's still a top 20, right? But I don't think we're going to see a Fantastic Beasts 3. I think they're going to sort of reboot their strategy for those films. And maybe in 3 years, 4 years, we'll see something entirely different from the Harry Potter universe. That would be my guess. So that was 19. Number 18 was Halloween. It did 159 total domestically. This thing opened up at 76. I forgot it opened so high, and that was on the weekend of October 19th, and it closed out just closed it after the new year. This one was a fascinating, it's one of those movies that I followed kind of religiously when it was announced, just because I'm a huge horror fan. I love the original Halloween. John Carpenter is like one of my heroes. And so to hear that they were rebooting again, but also I lived through all of the sequels. And so I had a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth with the reboots. The Rob Zombie stuff I was not into. H2O was great, but then there was one right after H2O. It was just on TV the other day. It was like they're in like a haunted house and it's reality TV, and Busta Rhymes is in it. It was just like one of the worst. It was such an artifact of the early 2000s. it just was awful. I remember going to see that opening night with all my friends. This would have been in college probably. And it was like the worst experience because the film was just trash. And so there's a lot of, I say that because there's a lot of baggage with the Halloween films, especially the later films. None of them come even close to capturing the sort of primalness and the directness and bluntness of the original, which is just a horror classic, and really kicked off the slasher genre, which dominated the 80s into the 90s. You know, the biggest horror film in the 90s probably culturally was Scream, and that was basically a postmodern riff on the slasher genre. So it really dominated for like 20 years almost. And so the reteam, you know, the reboot here, Jamie Lee Curtis is back, David Gordon Green, and so as the director, so it was kind of a different choice, a Universal Blumhouse coming together again to sort of reboot this thing. Jason Blum being behind most of it, probably, I imagine. Danny McBride writing the script. So a really fascinating new take on it. Pops off at 76, which kind of blew my mind. I think the expectation with Halloween was like, hey, people are hyped for this. The trailer people enjoyed. I was thinking more like 50, and that would have been like a really fantastic performance. I think it was shot for like $20 million. It was a really low production budget on this one. But it pops off at 76, really takes advantage of those last 2 weeks leading up into Halloween. Not even the last 2 weeks, like the last week and a half almost. And then kind of tapers off a bit. Multiplier on this, wow, I did not realize that. I'm just looking at these like final numbers for the first time. So opened at 76, closed at 159. Multiplier, basically 2.1, which is shit. That is a terrible multiplier. But a couple of factors. One, it's a horror film. Horror films in general have low multipliers. I don't exactly know why. They pop off opening weekend. People want to be scared, but then they're over it by the second weekend. I don't know why that is. That's a very common pattern. So that's one issue. The second issue is the time of the release. So people wanted to see this before Halloween. There was 12 days before Halloween when this was released. So it didn't have a ton of runway to do like a 3x multiplier or something like that. So I imagine that's probably what happened there. Quality of the film was good. People enjoyed it. I didn't really like it all that much. I had a good time with it, but I didn't think it was that great of a movie. It certainly did not capture much of the original. I just don't get why people don't understand what made the original Halloween so good. It's not rocket science. Like, you can watch it and tell what makes that film so just unsettling. And I don't understand why people don't. I don't know. I think David Gordon Green wanted to do something different. Danny McBride obviously has a different sort of comedic IQ for stuff like this. So it just, while I thought those choices were very interesting, I don't necessarily know that it lent itself to making something that was kind of in harmony with the original. I would have gotten the guy who did It Follows to do it. I forget his name. He has this new movie, Under Silver Lake, which is apparently coming out, but also never coming out at the same time. So I would have got somebody like that who was a little more like well, I'm not going to go into it too much, but it's a fantastic performance nonetheless. Huge win for Universal and Blumhouse. Blumhouse is just printing money. They're like a little institution. They're like a little big studio right now. They're getting into TV and stuff like that. They're releasing tons of movies. Happy Death Day DU is coming out on near Valentine's Day this year. So it was a little bit of a bet and a huge win, I think, for everybody involved with the new Halloween. Terrible multiplier though. Number 17 was Hotel Transylvania 3 Summer Vacation. It opened up at 44 in July. I didn't follow this one too closely. Closed out at 167. Multiplier on that, as I'm doing it with my calculator, 3.79. And here's what Halloween, Hotel Transylvania back to back, just talking about those two. You can see the differences in how films play out over their box office run. Halloween was never going to get a 3x multiplier if it's released on that weekend. Never going to happen. Hotel Transylvania 3, on the other hand, opens essentially in the height of the season, or right at the end of the height of the season, mid-July. It sort of rides that wave all the way through when kids go back to school. So I had a good month and a half to make a lot of business, and that's why it has a 3.7 multiplier, 3.8 multiplier actually. And then with children's films in general, They have higher multipliers. I don't know why. I think it's just because families don't rush out to see the movie opening weekend necessarily. They can wait or go during the week and stuff like that. So they tend to play a lot longer and a lot better in the long run. So Hotel Transylvania 3 was 17. Number 16 was Crazy Rich Asians. Did 174 domestically. Remember this one opened up the weekend after or week after. It was a Wednesday open on this one. It was very strange. I forget. It opened up on August 15th with $26 million, which was really surprising. But I think more surprising is those legs. $74 million on a $26 million open is insane. 6.69 multiplier. So the context of this film was, I think, from a box office nerd perspective, it's opening in the doldrums of summer. This is the end of summer. That weekend is where things really start to sort of tailspin into the ground in terms of box office receipts. So Warner Brothers was very smart about this release. They opened it in essentially what was a desert in the box office and usually is. And they basically said, hey, we're going to put this out now, but we're going to have this marketing campaign. And it was really kind of, because it's an ensemble film, and it was kind of an ensemble marketing campaign. And the push on this thing was insane. I started to hear kind of like buzz about it. And what I mean by buzz, it wasn't that I just was seeing a trailer or that I was hearing about it. There was something about the way people were talking about it. This is probably right around the beginning of August, I would say. And you just knew immediately like this was going to be one of those cultural touchstone films. And what I mean by that, it wasn't like, hey, it was a pretty good movie. The marketing was good, but there was like this social drive to go see it and support a movie that was made mostly by a group of people that didn't always get on the marquee sign. You know, it was made by the cast is mostly Asian. I think most of the production, maybe not most of the production, but at least the director were Asian as well. So it was one of those sort of like celebration of multiculturalism and liberalism. And it got people sort of hyped up to go see this and support it as much as like going to enjoy it, if that makes sense. It's a good movie. I think people really liked it in general. And it obviously opened up at 26, closed it at 174. Amazing legs, over 6x legs on this one. And, just a grand slam for Warner Brothers. The right marketing at the right time. Took advantage of that quiet season in late August, early September, and just... it was a juggernaut. I think we had one of the best multipliers in the top 20 this year. So that was 16. Number 15 was A Quiet Place, which opened up in early April. Opened up at 50 million, closed out at 188. This one, John Krasinski, Jim from The Office directed. This one you could tell right away that it was going to do quite well once the trailer dropped. The trailer was amazing. Emily Blunt like cowering in that bathtub. The total silence of it. This is where, when I do a post-mortem and I talk about like product conception versus product quality being the execution of the concept is also super important. It has to be interesting and novel and unique to get people excited about it and engaged. And A Quiet Place is a perfect example of a near perfect concept. The trailer demonstrated that perfectly. And this one, so it opened up at 50, closed out at 188. That opening in early April was incredibly surprising. I thought this thing was going to cap out at like 35, 40 maybe. But it really popped off and had a good multiplier for a horror thriller too. I think a lot of that has to do with, this is a Paramount film, executive produced by Michael Bay. And you could see that polish. Like, you can say whatever you want about Michael Bay, but when he produces a film, it has a certain level of quality to it. It has that box office cinematic polish. And A Quiet Place benefited heavily from that. And I think that's what got people engaged. That's what got people to go out. And then word of mouth took over. People were talking about how they were afraid to eat their popcorn in the movie because it was so drop a pin silent when people went to go see this in the theater. And then it became an experience, a communal experience that you had to do with other people. And that's what gets people to go out to the box office, right? Or to go out to the movie theater. So that was A Quiet Place, number 15. A really fantastic performance for that one. Closed it at 188. Number 14 was Ralph Breaks the Internet. This one did pretty well. Opened up in November. At 56, November 21st was that weekend. Closed. It hasn't really closed out yet, but it's made most of its money, probably 95% of its money, 99% at 188. This is a good performance, but a couple things to keep in mind. It's kind of equal with the original, which came out, 2012, so 6 years ago. It didn't really improve all that much on the original. The production budget was very high for this, 175. For an animated film, that is kind of outrageously high. You kind of have to wonder what they're spending that money on. So while this one is successful, I don't think it's going to be massively profitable just because the production budget was so high. But it's a good movie nonetheless, a good performance. Are they going to do another one? It took them 6 years to get everybody together to do this one. I doubt we're going to get another Ralph Breaks the Internet in the movie theater, maybe on Disney's streaming service in a couple of years. But this is a good performance overall, just not sort of outstanding. What was outstanding was number 13 in the 2018 box office, Bohemian Rhapsody. Opened up at 51, closed out at 196. There's I could do a whole episode on Bohemian Rhapsody. A lot of context to talk about on this one, but sort of the short story is Sacha Baron Cohen, Bruno, if you will, he was set to do Freddie Mercury. There was so much buzz behind that, and I believe Bryan Singer, as the director, was attached at the time as well. So there was so much buzz when this movie was announced by Fox. Then Cohen drops out. Then they get Rami Malek, who everybody loves, Mr. Robot. He's an amazing actor, kind of a hidden gem for a while, but he's really sort of bloomed as a big star right now. So he's attached to Freddie Mercury, so people are excited again. You still got Bryan Singer. Then Me Too happens, and then people are taking a look at the sort of sexual exploits of people in Hollywood. Bryan Singer has a lot of rumors surrounding him, a lot of accusations surrounding him. So he was about 90% the way through shooting this movie, and Fox pulls him, basically fires him, says, we can't deal with the negative press anymore with your sort of whatever you did in the past, so we're getting somebody else and to finish this. So leading up to this and getting released, I thought there was a lot of hype behind it. Everybody loves Queen. Queen is a worldwide phenomenon, still is. But the production history and then the reviews dropped, and they basically said it was terrible. The top critics gutted this film. My expectation when this thing was opening in November was, well, I thought it was going to be big, but because it's a bad quality, it looks like there's production issues, it's probably going to flop. I thought it was going to open at like $20 million, $25 million and maybe make 50 or 60 tops. It opens up at 51, is still going strong, and will still go strong for a while because of the awards. Just won Best Film at Golden Globes. It's just so bizarre to me. It's sitting at 196, and I guess it closed out the year at 196. This is a grand slam. This to me is like, it started out like this could be huge, then it was like, oh, this is going to be a train wreck, and then sort of turned the corner again. It's kind of like somebody hitting a single in baseball, and it ended up being a sort of inside the park home run. That's what it feels like for Bohemian Rhapsody. It is just the biggest of wins for Fox. Especially because of the context of what was happening, and this Golden Globe win came out of nowhere. Nobody thought it was going to win Best Film Globe. I mean, it's absurd that it even won. There's like A Star Is Born is so significantly better objectively than this film, but whatever, it doesn't matter. I think the Hollywood Foreign Press is like 100 members, and that's who votes, so it can get skewed pretty quickly. But Bohemian Rhapsody doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what critics think. Doesn't matter what I think. It is just a massive, huge hit for Fox and everybody involved. Rami Malek, I think, carried the film, and that's why people have enjoyed it so much. I think that people just want to go see it to see something about Queen and Freddie Mercury because they're so beloved. I mean, worldwide, really a worldwide global band that hasn't put it on a record in 20, 30 years. So just one of the more like unsurprising and then surprising hits of 2018. Number 12 was A Star Is Born, kind of a foil here. Opened up at 42 in early October, closing out the year at 202. An amazing performance. The quality of the film is fantastic. Critics loved it. I thought this was a shoo-in for the Golden Globe win. And I called this one. Like, I knew when the reviews were dropping and the hype from Venice was just extreme. that this is going to be one of those movies that would open big and just play and play and play all the way through February, or whenever the Oscars are. The fact that it opened a little bit depressed at 42, I thought that was a little bit low for where it was going to go, just because the hype the weeks before, you could just feel it in the air that people wanted to see this, and it was on every TV show. Everybody was tweeting about it. So it opened at 42, a little bit depressed, but I knew that the legs would kick in. And so it's sitting at 202 now. On the same weekend, that October 5th weekend, Venom opened up at 80, and it's at 213, number 11 on the 2018 list. So these two were going neck and neck. And you can kind of see that, like, you know, Venom opens up at 80, does 213 through the year. A Star is Born opens up at 42, does 202, kind of like catching up every single weekend. That's just the difference in multipliers. You know, Star is Born opened up half as much and may end up beating Venom overall at the box office when it's finished with its run. Speaking of Venom, what a crazy film. This one's kind of like Bohemian Rhapsody in the fact that, like, leading up to it, the weeks before release was like, this is a train wreck. It's not very good. Critics hate it. This is probably going to flop. But audiences are like, nope, I want to see Venom. I want to see Thomas Hardy. I guess they love the character. The trailers were terrible. So I don't get how this did $80 million opening weekend and went on to do 213. It still surprises me. But I think that, you know, it's great for Sony. Now they can do another Venom movie and continue to do the Spider-Man stuff. Sony's kind of proving themselves to play a sort of, not antagonist, but like, they can not hang with MCU, but they can still keep going with these characters, and they don't feel like they got to sell them all off to MCU and have them do all the movies. They can still do them internally and make that catch. And Venom sort of proves that. I guess this was driven by males under 25. I think that's what the Cinema Score post-track data was saying. But $80 million for a movie like this opening weekend, beating Aquaman. Aquaman opened at 67. Venom did $13 million more. I just don't know who showed up to see this and why they were so hyped, because every indication before it opened, it was like, this is a mess. This looks stupid. I think maybe it was like a lot of memeing and like irony that people went to go see it. That's what I've heard. So whatever. 213, big win for Sony on this one. Number 10, Solo: A Star Wars Story. Yikes. Opened at 84, closed out at 213. The first Star Wars flop ever. There's a lot of reasons why this happened, and I covered them a lot this year in the podcast. The production mess was a disaster. Firing Lord and Miller, huge mistake. They had shot, I think, all of the film, and Ron Howard had to go back and reshoot it all. And Ron Howard, look, he's an old man professional. He's been doing this for, 50 years probably. He knows what he's doing. He probably delivered I haven't seen yet, probably a very serviceable Star Wars movie. But all the edge was cut off. There's nothing edgy about Ron Howard. Lord and Miller was edge. And so, I guess it was Kathleen Kennedy. I think she makes those calls at Disney. They screwed up, and they had probably a really fascinating, interesting new film that was going to come out. And another big problem here. So the production quality or production issues were a problem. The quality of the film was okay. It wasn't up to snuff with a top tier blockbuster movie, which I would say needs to be at least 80% in Rotten Tomatoes. Like, that's just the quality that you need to deliver from a story perspective and visual perspective. That wasn't here with Solo. So that was a big issue. And then the release date. Makes no sense to me why you put this out in May 2018 after you put Last Jedi out in December. Last Jedi is going to play strong all the way through February. So you basically have, 3 months tops until another Star Wars movie? That makes no sense. They have owned December for the last 3 years now. Like, just open it up in December. Like, it didn't make any sense why you put this out in May and rush it. So a lot of hubris involved here by Disney, and I think it really bit them in the ass on this one. So it's the first Star Wars flop. Is that going to affect whatever the next episode is? What is it, episode 9 or something? I don't think so. I think The Last Jedi, despite having quality problems, whatever it is, it's still Star Wars. People are still going to show up and see it. But Solo's not doing anybody's fan. From a product conception standpoint, Han Solo is probably one of the most beloved figures in cinematic history, at least in the last 50 years. So like the conception was there. You could have done a really good movie like this. They just kind of screwed up everything. They basically had the ball like the 10-yard line and fumbled it and lost it. That's essentially what happened. Okay, so that was Solo. Number 10 did 213. Number 9 was Ant-Man and the Wasp. Opened up at 75 in early July of 2018. Closed out at 216. This one's kind of it's an odd one, just because we had Black Panther and Avengers Infinity War, the two biggest movies of the year, literally, open up before Ant-Man. By the time Ant-Man comes around in July, it seems like an afterthought. It seems like a weird post-Infinity War movie to put out. It just seemed small. So it opened at 75 though, which is better than the original, which opened at 55. Closed out at 216. I think it's gonna do. I'm sure it's gonna make money. It's not a flop. But the problem here is that expectation-wise, MCU has become so inflated, especially after this year. The expectation for a top-tier MCU film that is Avengers, essentially, any of the Avengers film, is it going to make $200 million opening weekend? That's the expectation now, which is insane, how quickly things have changed in the last few years. For a tier B MCU film, that's like the single character movies or a sequel to one of the single character movies, a Captain America, Thor Ragnarok, obviously Ant-Man and the Wasp. The expectation going into this year was probably baseline $100 million opening, closes out at 250 about. So Ant-Man opening up at 75 it just felt weird, I guess. To have an MCU movie not open above 100 and crush it to 250. So that was a little bit odd. The quality is, man, I hate this movie. Like, I didn't like the original at all. This is worse. It's just not my cup of tea. It seems very small. I loved Avengers Infinity War, one of my favorite movies of the year, because it was just so epic and just amazing. Ant-Man and the Wasp just felt super small, pun intended. It just didn't feel like it could ever live up to that hype. And I think they're gonna, I don't know, I think MCU, we'll see how Captain Marvel does. Maybe it'll be massive and huge, but I don't know. I think MCU is going to change dramatically after the end of the Avengers 2 movies here. The second one coming out, I guess, April or May of this year. I think that cinematic universe is shifting a lot. But Ant-Man and the Wasp kind of felt like a pre-Infinity War movie, and that's, I think, why it didn't do 250 or open above 100. But still a good movie in terms of profitability. I think it's gonna do all right for Disney. Number 8 was Mission Impossible Fallout. Opened up at 61, closed it at 220. This series is one of the most consistent series over the last, I guess, almost 20 years now. Tom Cruise is Mission Impossible. And he really went all in on this movie. He broke his ankle. That's why the production cost ballooned to like, I don't even know, it was like $200 million or something close. So this one is a really good performance for this movie. And I think what's interesting here is I think it could be a good send-off for Tom Cruise. Maybe he does one more, and they bring in somebody else to sort of take over his role in the series. But he really is the foundation of the Mission Impossible brand now, and has been since, what was the original? Like, God, it feels like forever ago. And what's interesting here is these movies used to dominate the box office. When I started following the box office in the mid-90s, this was the type of movie that would be in the top 4, top 5 easily. Now that's been taken over by comic book movies. So it is interesting to see a sort of traditional action film still in the top 10, doing really well. I think most of that has to do with the quality of the film. The set pieces and the action in this are just amazing. So elaborate and rich and like totally engaging, and this movie just pulls you in, and it's kind of nonstop like that, which is one of the reasons why I think it did so well, above a 3x multiplier, which is a really good sign for the 6th sequel in a series. That's a quality play is what that is. That's quality word of mouth that's kicking in. So great performance for Mission Impossible Fallout overall. Not going to be super profitable just because of the ballooning production budget, because I think mostly because Cruise broke his ankle and has shut down production for a couple months, maybe in a few months. But I think it's a big win for Paramount that this is still going strong. Number 7 for the year was Dr. Seuss. The Grinch did 269 to close out the year, 67 opening. Look, I don't understand this movie at all. I don't understand. No one was asking for another Grinch movie, and it didn't really look that good. It wasn't above that 80% mark on Rotten Tomatoes, so it didn't really meet the quality expectations of a sort of top shelf blockbuster, but it performed like one. And I don't know why. And maybe it's a children's film opening during the holidays. It's animated. It had all of those things going for it. But it still kind of blows my mind that it made 269 just in 2018, and it's still out there, I think, in a lot of theaters. It just goes to show you that, like, I think ultimately what this is if you look at postmortems, right? And I do the four sort of corners of that: product conception, product quality, marketing quality, and marketing sort of strategy or quantity. I think with Dr. Seuss, the conception really isn't there. Nobody cares. An animated film about Grinch, that's not novel or new or interesting. So the conception wasn't great. The quality is okay. It's not like a terrible movie, but it's not a great movie. I think it was sitting in the 60s Rotten Tomatoes. So those kind of don't play the factors here. I think maybe it was just like the marketing on it. Even though the trailers weren't very good, maybe they just inundated people with like the Grinch. It's like, hey, you know the Grinch, you have kids, go see this movie. It's got Benedict Cumberbatch in it. I think that was probably it. And that's like about as cynical as you can get with entertainment and commerce and movies and box office stuff. But like, I think that's the way it is sometimes. And Dr. Seuss is not a good movie. And it made a lot of money. And that's just the short and the long of it. Number 6 this year was Aquaman. Massive win for Warner Brothers. Opened up at 67 here at the last couple of weeks of 2018. Closed out the year at 275. I think it's currently like 290-ish domestically. It broke the $1 billion mark worldwide. Aquaman broke the $1 billion mark worldwide. This is one of the biggest stories of the year, easily. Like, it's not so surprising because it's a comic book movie or anything like that. It's surprising because it's DCEU, which has had some real problems in the past. Batman vs. Superman and Justice League. Batman vs. Superman was profitable, was one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Quality-wise, it was terrible. Justice League paid the price for the bad quality of Batman vs. Superman and was a huge flop. Probably lost $150 million for Warner Brothers. So DCEU was in a bad place. Suicide Squad did do well, but the big kicker, I think, pop-off was Wonder Woman breaking the $400 million mark. That was, a couple summers ago. So that reinvigorated that series. And Aquaman was kind of a bet. It was like, he's not the most well-known character per se. He's kind of a tier B character. Can he carry a movie in December and do really well? The answer is absolutely yes. James Wan killed it on this movie. The quality is a little bit suspect here, but I just think it was such a spectacle. They did such a great job marketing this film, and I think the release date was pretty perfect. And so I think Aquaman's going to help rebuild the foundation of DCEU with Wonder Woman. Get 2 more single action character movies that break the $200 million, 250 mark, and you got yourself a new Justice League 2.0 to put out maybe 5-6 years from now. So Warner Brothers has righted the ship with DCEU with Aquaman, and it's great victory for them. Number 5 was Deadpool 2. Opened up at 125 back in mid-May, only a few weeks after Avengers Infinity War, remember. Closed it at 318. This one's a good performance, solid performance. A little bit, I think, underwhelming for Fox compared to the original. The original was such a cultural moment in 2016 that I think this one just couldn't live up to that. It was like such a confluence back then in February 2016, because it was Deadpool. It was like this passion project. It had a really unique voice to it and odd marketing that really spoke kind of for a new direction in comic book movies that was more adult, more sort of parody and ironic than, say, an Avengers film. And it popped off, and it was so surprising how well that movie did. Deadpool 2, very similar in vein, but has really, I saw it opening weekend, lost its luster from the original. It's like, how many times can you do the parody of a superhero and it's just nothing but jokes? And like, I'm complaining about it. It did make $318 million, but the expectation here was at least 350, I would say. And I think a lot of it here I think there's two major elements in why this did not necessarily meet expectations. I'm not going to call it underperforming, because this will make a massive profit for Fox, no doubt. Probably $150 million, maybe on higher, just in pure profit. So it's not underperforming, but it didn't perform to what they expected, I think, for two main reasons. One, the release date was too close to Avengers Infinity War and too close to Solo. Not like Solo did a lot of business, but it was too close. It was only 3 weeks after Avengers Infinity War, which was the second biggest movie of the year. So massive. Deadpool 2 probably should have come out on a different weekend. Maybe pushed it back even into August and would have owned August. Because August was wide open this year. And that's why Crazy Rich Asians and the Meg were able to take advantage of that. So different release date, I think, would have helped a lot here. And I think number two, it became... Ryan Reynolds is great, and the Deadpool character is amazing and really fun. But it kind of speaks to a very specific moment. And like that type of comedy and parody tends to get old. And irony works once, it doesn't usually work twice. And I think there's a little bit of fatigue with that sort of approach to the comic book movie world. And I did a long special about comic book movies. I can't remember how many years, like maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, where I talked a lot, or even in the podcast I did around Wonder Woman, I talked a lot about the different paths that the comic book movie world can take. And I think that like this year has sort of muddied the waters a little bit on what paths are going to move forward. Avengers is coming to a close, right? So that very grandiose, just bombastic, almost like old Hollywood versions of comic book movies, just these massive films. I think that style might shift a bit. It might have to, because Avengers is coming to a close this May. So Deadpool seemed like a different path forward. It's like more adult, rated R, super violent, a lot of raunchy sexual jokes. So it's not meant for kids. Kids should not be seeing Deadpool. They can see Avengers Infinity War probably, but not Deadpool. Totally seems like totally different audiences. So there's more adult path that was like the irony pastiche parody path, which was Deadpool. And then you had this other path, which was more like Logan, where it was like an adult drama path within the comic book movies. And there's some people have been saying comic movies are never going to go away because they're like Westerns now. It's just this genre that's going to stick around for decades, which is entirely possible. But you can see it sort of filtering out different subgenres within comic book movies. I think the parody irony path is short, because it's only funny because of the movies that preceded it. Deadpool is only funny because for the 15 years before that, comic book movies were just the biggest things out there, number one. So everybody had seen multiples of them, so they know the genre very well. So you can make fun of the genre because it's a collective language that we all have. We've all seen these movies. They also had a pretty serious "we're saving the world" tone, and Deadpool sort of played off of that. The problem is that with parody and irony, it has a short shelf life, because once you make fun of something, then you take power away from it, and power away from that type of storytelling. A good example would be, and this happens in horror all the time, look at Scream and then look at Scary Movie. Like, there were a lot of scary movies that were made, but they quickly dried up, like very quickly dried up, and like started to like not make any money at all. That's why I think that the irony sort of comedic path in comic book movies, I feel like might be a little bit of a dead end. Feel like films are probably going to go more towards the Logan. Maybe even Wonder Woman was kind of like that too. A little more serious, more adult themed stories than just saving the world. Like, because was Logan really about saving the world? No, it's kind of about saving himself and his sense of humanity. It was like an emotional narrative. And so I think like Deadpool 2 just kind of, I think it performed very well. But the question is, what about Deadpool 3? Right? What's going to happen with Deadpool 3? Like, are they going to give it $200 million production budget and release it in June? It's possible. They're going to do something with it, but I think they need to take a little bit of slightly different direction. I would say even more in a serious tone, which is surprising, but I think that might help it a bit. The third one to sort of meet the expectations of the original. Okay, so that was number 5, a little bit of a mini rant. I apologize for that. But it helps give context here to what's going on. I think number 4, Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. This one opened up at 148, closed out at 417. On the surface, just on paper, fantastic Grand Slam performance. Comparatively to the last film and to expectations, yeah, a little bit of an underperformance, I would say. Not a flop in any stretch of imagination. This thing will make $200-300 million in profit alone for Universal. But diminishing returns from the original. The original did over $600 million domestically. This is $200 million off of that. Worldwide, it was a little bit of a better story for the sequel in terms of not a smaller gap from the original. Original did 1.6, this did 1.6 billion, this did 1.3 billion. And this goes to my sort of theory of the sequel paying the crimes for the sins of the original. The original Jurassic World popped off, $200 million opening. Nobody expected that. It was a huge surprise. Did over $600 million just domestically. So, but the problem is, so everybody saw that movie. Everybody in America saw Jurassic World. It was just hype. It was like hype incarnate. When it came out, a lot of it was nostalgia for the original Jurassic World, or Jurassic Park, I should say. It's not a good movie. Jurassic World is not good. It's not well put together. The story's shitty. The acting's not great. The action sequences are okay. There's a weird cynicism, kind of dark underbelly to it that was just bizarre. And I think Jurassic World kind of, in addition to the marketing being pretty terrible and the trailers being awful, what was with the original trailer? It was like basically an ad for Budweiser. That was just weird. This movie is awful. It is so bad. I tried to get through it multiple times and I just cannot get it. It's just the last half hour of this reminds me of Batman vs Superman as like one of the worst of like blockbusters that I've seen. That being said, it's going to make $200 million in profit for Universal, but like Deadpool 2, I'm going to foil these 3 films off of each other. Aquaman, Deadpool 2, and Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. I would say of the 3, Aquaman is the best, even though it made less money, is the best win here because it is a building block to a huge billion-dollar brand for DCEU. It rights that ship and has it helps build a great future for Warner Brothers and that brand of movies. Deadpool 2 is going to make a lot of money, made more than Aquaman, but it kind of lost the luster of the original. I'm not really sure where the third one's going to go. I don't think Fox is sure what sort of tone to play with it, so it muddied the waters a little bit about Deadpool and that brand. Jurassic World, I think, is even worse, despite making $100 million more than Deadpool 2, mostly because it's a terrible movie, and it's despite making a lot of money, it basically lost $200 million off the original, so we're talking pretty extreme diminishing returns. It's not a flop again, but it is a very clear underperformance from expectations what this thing was going to do. Worldwide is a lot better, but also that though, the shift to getting more money worldwide is kind of not, I want to call it desperate, but it's sort of like it's a strategy that Universal was probably like, well, it's not making as much money domestically. We got to find other places for this thing to make cash. That's what it kind of feels like. So despite the fact Aquaman did less than these 2 movies, almost $200 million less than Jurassic World, I feel better about that performance than I do Deadpool 2 or Jurassic World. I feel like Jurassic World, the third one, which will happen because it's going to make money, it needs a reboot, just like Fantastic Beasts needs a reboot. But whereas Jurassic World can be Jurassic World 3, I don't think they're going to be in Fantastic Beasts 3. It has to be a completely different narrative within the Harry Potter universe. Jurassic World can find a way to stay in the same group of characters and just shift it dramatically to a different perspective. Like get Jeff Goldblum to be the main character, please. We all love him. Okay, so that's let's get into the top 3 then. So Incredibles 2 did 608 total, opened up at 182 back in June 15th, that weekend. This one was like, everybody knew this was going to be huge, it's going to be massive. The original is like one of the most beloved films of all time, animated wise, especially the last 20 years. there's no surprise here. Like, this is expected to do this well. I'm surprised that it did break the $600 million mark. I'm surprised it broke the $500 million mark. I'm not surprised it's in the top three. I am surprised by how much it actually did. Original opened up in 2004, opened up at 70, closed out at 261. It is 14 years later, inflation, stuff like that. But there was such a cult following around the original that this one was just built to pop off. And Disney has the top three movies this year: Incredibles 2, Avengers: Infinity War, and Black Panther. So number two, of course, is Avengers: Infinity War. Opened up at 257, the biggest opening weekend of all time in the history of the box office. Who knows how long that'll stand. Opened up in April, that end of April weekend, April 27th. Opened up at 257, closed it at 678. That one, Infinity War, there was no real fear that was going to underperform at all. It's kind of the closing out of the Avengers series, which is kind of closing out a really vital, important phase of the MCU cinematic universe. So there was no reason when this one was going to open under 180, right? That was like the basement on that one. Close out, just depending on the quality of film. It turned out to be an amazing film. I don't even like the other Avengers movies. Ultron's terrible. But Infinity War, I was totally bought into the whole thing. I thought it was fantastic. It was so well done. And just like huge blockbuster movie making at its best. And so, closed out at 678. What's the second one going to do here? I don't know. It's probably going to do as well, I wouldn't think, right? Just because there's always that diminishing sort of people coming back. I didn't see the first one, so why would I see the second one? It beat out the original Avengers. Infinity War beat out the original Avengers, came out in 2012. Ultron 2 came out in 2015. Ultron did 459. Avengers 1 did 623. This one did 678. So it's huge. It's the second biggest MCU film of all time. Number one MCU film of all time was number one for this year, Black Panther. Opened up at 202, closed out at $700 million domestically. That's domestically $700 million. Where is that on the all-time list? I should know on the top of my head, but I don't. It's number 3 all-time. Number 1 is Star Wars Force Awakens, which did 936. Avatar did 760 back in 2009, and then Black Panther is at number 3 all-time at the box office. What can we say about this film? I did not believe that it was going to perform anywhere near what this one did. I was thinking like a 150 opening, 140 opening, closes out 3x that. That's what I was thinking. Because look, it's the February date. It's not summer. It's Valentine's Day. It's kind of like, it's a cool character that people were super into, but it didn't feel like there was necessarily a super amount of hype behind the character. But I knew that I was wrong probably around middle of January, where the hype I've never seen hype for a movie like this ever. It had to be the most hyped film of all time. Or at least one of them in my lifetime. It's just the amount of people that were talking about it. It was literally, you could not escape people talking about Black Panther a month before it came out. People were just so stoked about it. People were buying up theaters to take kids to go see it. Like, this is when I was talking about before, like, cultural touch points. This is the definition of one. So like, this was, people were engaged for a lot of reasons. 1, it's MCU. 2, it's a brand new character. 3, it's an African-American character, which was different. African-American cast taking place in Africa. Like, that's a kind of unique sort of viewpoint in the MCU, or a unique story within the MCU universe. And so, there's a lot of things going for it, but I think what really put it over the top and pushed it past that $200 million mark and on to $700 million, the number one movie of 2018, I think it was a cultural moment where, in the same way that people wanted to celebrate Crazy Rich Asians, people wanted to celebrate this movie as almost a way to come together as people and be like, this is amazing. The entire cast is black, even though they're not even American, not all of them. and it felt unique, and it felt kind of vital at this time, especially in America, where politically things have gotten vile. I mean, it's the worst political environment I've ever been in, and I've been a political junkie probably since I was a teenager in the 90s. This is 10x, 100x worse than I've ever seen it. And open racism. I mean, just absolute violent open racism is all over this country. And I think Black Panther was it was a rallying cry to say, no, like, we're not on board with what these other people are doing in our country. We're not on board with our president, who's an open racist. Like, we're not on board with this. And I think a lot of the support behind Black Panther and the difference between, $400 million domestically and $700 million was that cultural sort of support and frenzy and hype and rally to go see this and support something that stood in opposition to a lot of things that we were reading about and seeing in our daily lives in the United States. So I think that's the major reason why it went past the other movies in the top 5, essentially. I think it was always going to be in the top 5 movies, I think, somewhere around there, no matter what. But that cultural spark and sort of fire is what really pushed it into that $700 million realm in the top 3 all time at the box office. It was insane to watch. I mean, it was the most fascinating things I've ever seen. Not just the opening, but the fact that it just didn't drop. Like, it just didn't go away. Like, people just kept going to see it over and over again. And so it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And I think, too, it was an across the board sort of cultural moment. It just wasn't African Americans. Like, African Americans only make up about 13% of the U.S. population. They alone couldn't get this movie to $700 million. No, this was like across the board. All different types of people were going to see this multiple times and really enjoying it and loving it. And that's why it was the #1 movie of the year. All right, so that's the top 20 for 2018, folks. What a interesting year at the box office. I did shows most weeks this year, so I kind of know all about these films and have talked about them multiple times before and deep dived into most of these films. So I have a fairly good sort of like understanding of the details, but if I take a step back and think about it on the big level, the big trends that we're seeing here are, where's the box office going? Where's the movie theater business going? I did a really long show about this, I think, over the summer about MoviePass sort of dying. And where's the movie theater going? I think what we're seeing is, the spectacle is winning. And this has like been a conversation as long as the movie theater's been around. These big, huge popcorn blockbusters are dominating, right? Whereas before that was happening, but that was more of a cultural critique about maybe the artistic quality of those films. Now it's a financial reality. Like, the top 10 films now take more proportion of the total box office than they ever have before. And that's what's happening. And so movies are getting bigger. They're doing better. Like, this is definitely the first year where we have 3 movies that did over $600 million just domestically. So it's becoming very top heavy. And there's not a ton of room for movies in the mid to lower tiers to really do all that well. Now, there are exceptions. Crazy Rich Asians was shot for under $50 million. Quiet Place was shot for under $50 million. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in the top 20 that was probably shot. Halloween was shot for under $20 million or $50 million. Those are probably the only 3 films in the top 20 that had what I would call mid-sized budgets. And even Halloween kind of almost had a small budget. There's just, those are exceptions. There's not a lot of room for those films at the box office to perform insanely well, like they were able to 20 years ago. That's completely changed now. And so when we go into 2019, I think it's going to be a similar pattern. We're going to see the comic book movies reign supreme. Avengers, Captain Marvel, and all the other comic book movies that are coming out. I think that's going to continue. And I do see a continued erosion of the lower to mid-tier films switching over to streaming, which is just becoming streaming entertainment. is becoming just a vital force in entertainment, and it has been. It's only technically been around for about like what? I mean, Netflix started streaming videos online 2007. Didn't really take off probably to 2010 when it really became popular. So it's only been about a decade or so where streaming has existed. But Netflix really created a new industry within the entertainment world, and it's going to shift, not necessarily take away billions of dollars from the box office, but it's going to shift the box office towards more spectacle, bigger films that you want to see in a movie theater with people, whether for a communal reason, like A Quiet Place, where it's more fun when you're like silent with like 50 people, like watching every move on screen, that sort of communal experience, or like a Black Panther, where it's very celebratory and people are just like just having a really good time at the movie theater with other people. There's a vibe and an energy to that social experience that you can't get from streaming. So I do think the box office in the movie theater industry is changing. I do see the smaller films getting kind of sort of switched over to streaming, and I see it continuing to get more and more top heavy. Now, there might be a place, for A Star Is Born, which is a smaller film, to do well if it has awards prestige. But if you look at the awards films this year, hardly any of them are doing all that well. And I don't mean the Bohemian Rhapsodies or A Star Is Born. I'm talking like The Favorite. What else is big this year? Like any of the First Man, Green Book. I'm trying to go through all the Isle of the Dogs, even something like Annihilation, Searching, which is an awards movie but a smaller film. Those smaller films, even if they have a ton of awards nominations, even if they have critics gushing over them, can't really make a ton of money anymore. There are exceptions, but in general, that's the rule. That wasn't the rule 15, 20 years ago. It just wasn't. If a movie was fantastic and really good, no matter how much it cost, it could have a chance to do well. Now that's all moving to streaming. And so I think that like the trends will continue. I think the best way for smaller and more unique, maybe more original films to do well, I think the model really is the Quiet Place model, which is a unique concept that's mostly original. It's not an old TV show. It's not another book. It's not a book series. It's not an established IP. You take a novel concept and you put, and I hate it, it pains me to say this, you put the Michael Bay polish on it, because then it rises to the level of a cinematic spectacle that will get people over that barrier of getting in their car, planning to go with people, paying a lot of money to go see it. That's a pretty significant barrier. And to get people over that, it has to be interesting. It has to be engaging in terms of the marketing and the story, but it has to be a spectacle, and you have to want to go see it in the theater. And I think that's probably the best model for smaller films, say under $50 million or $100 million production budget, to get people out to go see them. Because if they're not, then like, it's funny, like you compare like The Quiet Place versus Bird Box. The Quiet Place, Bird Box, premiered on Netflix. It's meme territory now. Like everybody's seen Bird Box. It's all over Twitter. The question is, financially, does that help Netflix more than it helps Paramount to put The Quiet Place in a movie theater? That's really the new economics that are being worked out right now. Because A Quiet Place, minimum $10 per ticket. Netflix, $11, $15 per month for viewing whenever you want. Those are two completely different business models. I'm not sure which one's going to win out over the next 5-10 years, but Quiet Place made a ton of cash for Paramount. That's like money in the bank. With Netflix, it's like, well, how much money is Bird Box making them? Literally, like, what's the down to the dime amount of money that movie has made that company? And I think that's sort of the big struggle in the industry now, is like, how do we, it's the straight capitalism, how do we make the most profitable products in films and pieces of entertainment, works of entertainment? And the question, it's a massive question mark right now. So that's why I think we're going to see a lot of shifting in the box office in the streaming world. Then we're going to be going back and forth, kind of fighting with each other to figure out, or even internally within studios, trying to figure out how to make great movies and stories that are going to connect with people and make a lot of money off of them. And I think that's still the sort of existential question of the industry. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And I think it's going to get more, that questioning is going to get more pointed, and the experimentation is going to get more interesting over the next few years, because they're going to have to figure out that answer. So, that's 2018. It was a great year at the box office. Things went up. Last year's year in review show was kind of like a downer because the year didn't do all that well. But this year was a totally different story, I think, and it was really, the foundation of that was Avengers: Infinity War and Black Panther, and Incredibles 2, all Disney movies. And Disney is the king of the box office this year. They're taking over Fox. I think already they've taken over Fox. So they're going to own at least 14% of the box office worldwide. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and how Disney, they essentially have monopoly status when they launch their own streaming service. They own everything from start of production to end of production. It's monopoly. So we'll see how long that'll last in the entertainment industry. But, it was a great, interesting year. I had a lot of fun following it. I think this year with the show, I'm going to continue to do it week in, week out. I'm going to try and focus a little bit more on international box office. Just because I think that's kind of a big blind spot for the show. I focused almost exclusively on domestic because I understand domestic more. But I think the international global box office is going to be a deeper focus this year. So I hope you enjoy, hope you join me and listen in. Thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wildline Podcast.